the most wonderful clinician with us today, Colton Hott. He works for the therapy group. Thank you so much for joining us. Colton we say this to him all the time, and I wonder if you get this, like, in other areas of your life. You are like a ray of sunshine.
Pure sun. Oh my God. Well, I'm so glad you said we're overjoyed because like Colton is pure joy.
Pure
so how
joy.
much do you get that feedback, Colton?
Oh my gosh, y'all are the sweetest. Thank you. I just so appreciate it. Sometimes I do hear that from other people, but it's just something that I take in. I'm like, thank you so much, because it truly means the world to me to hear it.
It's every time we talk to you, every time we encounter, you're just such like a beautiful energy. And so we're so happy to have you on the podcast today. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do. Give us the lay of the land.
I was going to say the 411. Give us the 411. What's
411? I don't think 411 is a thing anymore. No?
Nope, I don't think so. But Colton, tell us all about yourself.
I still know what the 411 means. So a little bit about me. Yeah, my name's Colton, and I actually started interning at the therapy group in, let me think here, it was probably winter of 2021. And
wow.
Just got my master's from Temple this May, and now I'm officially a clinician at the therapy group. And everything has just been super, super wonderful through here. And it's been really the most engaging thing to meet all the lovely folks at the group and really start finding like my own niche when it comes to therapy. I've really been enjoying working with clients on different aspects when it comes to sexuality, body image, college students, and those that might be struggling with symptoms of anxiety, depression, and going through some life transitions. And it's just been a beautiful experience so far, and getting to work with all the clients.
Okay, and now what led you to become a therapist? Because I feel like to me, it's so clear. You were like so comforting and like so easy to be around. But what was like your journey of why you chose?
Yeah, so that's a really big question. And I remember being an undergrad. I went to Gettysburg College for undergrad, and I originally wanted to be a psychiatrist. That was my absolute end goal, like total dream. And I remember taking like the first two like classes for med school, and I was like, this is not for me. This is something that I don't quite see myself doing. And I have a lot of love and respect for the folks that are really able to do that and continue on that journey, because it's a really huge one. And I think for me, like after coming to those questions, I decided to double major in philosophy and psychology. And I really identified with my philosophy major. It was really a lot of being able to question things and critically think about things in ways that I've never been able to before. And it just opened my mind to just the vast world and getting to know and accept so many different people. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience to have. So after graduation and kind of having that philosophy and psychology double major, I was like, what do I really want to do? And like that part of me was still a little bit confused and a little bit stuck there. And interestingly enough, my senior seminar in undergrad was the science of marijuana. And from that class, I got to learn about all the different therapeutics of cannabis, all the different cannabinoids, how they bind and how that binding translates into medicinal relevance. And it was one of the most, truly just the coolest class I ever got to take in undergrad. And right at the time when I was graduating, I was like, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. There was a dispensary in Gettysburg, and medical cannabis was a really, really new thing happening in Pennsylvania. And just from taking that class and learning a little bit about it, got a job there. And that was when the program was super, super new. So only some of the qualifying conditions were cancer, MS, a lot of really debilitating conditions, a lot of folks coming in some stages that were really uncomfortable. So when I was really there and like helping folks understand how cannabis can be of medicinal use for them and really explaining a lot of the science to them and getting them some forms that they're going to be comfortable with, it was in that moment, it was kind of like that aha moment. I was like, I really enjoy being in that here and now with people and really making them feel safe, welcome, valued, and heard. And it was just so wonderful to like have that opportunity. And that's something that I still continue to do along the side with therapy right now. And I think that was just a huge catalyst for me in realizing like, yeah, this is the route that I want to go. I really want to help people. And while working there, I applied for my master's, got into Temple, and the rest is history.
Okay, so let's talk about working, because even now we still have to share you with working with cannabis, and which I think is the coolest thing in the world, even though I want you full-time all the time, my darling. But so you still work in the cannabis industry. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it is just so fun and one of the most rewarding things to possibly do. So when I first started in the cannabis industry, it was really new. The program was maybe out for not even quite a year. So a lot of folks were just coming in, needing to get some regimen set up. And I did a lot of the consults back in the day with those people, just really helping them understand like what forms of cannabis are going to be the most therapeutic for them, understanding the difference between cannabinoids and terpenes, what that might mean, and really just looking at it as a full spectrum and how I can really help give them something that's going to give them relief, but also in a way that's going to be comfortable and meaningful for them. So not only are those just some of the things that like I've done in helping folks get a little bit comfortable, get used to it, and some regimen set up. I did do some events back in the day, which was super fun before going to grad school. So one time I did this event at a hospital and it was like a little lecture for folks that had MS. It was an MS support group at a hospital that I went to and did a little seminar for them. One time I did a Q&A at the Y for the elderly and helping them understand just, the benefits of medical cannabis and helping them get registered for a card if they wanted to. And even did an event for the government of Pennsylvania, which was super cool in cannabis education.
Wow. What was that like for you to be educating, because I think it's one thing to educate kind of like our generation on it, but I'm wondering about the older generation and their preconceived notions around marijuana use.
What is that drug?
Yeah, right. That gateway drug. Dare.
And it was a lot of breaking some of those stigmas and a lot of those thoughts from before, and just like all of that old past research that was like, one, a lot of like problematic research too, and that was a lot of fear mongering from back in the day, but really being able to break that down and explain the science to them in a way that was going to be easy to understand, but also for them to really learn like, okay, this is how this can benefit me. Yes, here might be some risks associated with it, but there's risk with any drugs that we can take, pharmaceuticals we get from, the pharmacy, there's that big packet that you get. And also explaining that too to them is like, yes, there might be some inherent risks that we can understand, but here's a lot of the benefits and here's how this can be benefiting you based on your condition and the science from the research that I read.
Okay, so I think one of the things I keep hearing, is still to this day is that people are scared to tell their therapist they smoke cannabis.
Yeah.
Right now, for some people, it's because they don't have a medical card. There's some places that they still is not medical accessibility. I'm wondering, like, to talk a little bit about the intersection of like the cannabis education and being a therapist, and some of the fear clients still have of disclosing that to their clinicians.
Yeah. And, that's something that I always kind of think about too. And I think a lot of that really stems from is just a lot of the academic culture and from kind of the ways we grew up. Like I always think about when I grew up, when I was in school, it was a lot of those DARE programs. It was a lot of like, all drugs are bad. Drugs are going to lead to this and that. And I think through a lot of it, like even my own classes, aside from taking that science of marijuana class in my undergrad, it was a lot of learning like, oh, cannabis might be able to help with, pain or the nausea associated with chemotherapy. But then there's all these little bad things. And that's why we want to ignore this. And I think it's something that's been really pathologized, even in a lot of the helping professions. And I think is now that we're learning a little bit more and more about it and all the nuances of the science, we're actually able to say like, oh, here's how this can benefit people on all of these different spectrums with all of these different conditions, and really start to pinpoint how it can be used as a therapeutic rather than that old past research that was so stigmatizing, and really bleeding into today and kind of saying like, okay, here's what we can throw out from that and really take in with the new from all the great things we've been learning about it.
Wait, can I ask you something? Okay, so if you were going to reinvent the DARE program, which like I'm pretty sure that there's research on was like turned out to be the least effective public health, probably next to abstinence-only education.
People to do more drugs, I would assume.
You know what? I feel like I only had like one class in it, and I already knew about drugs at that point. So, but I mean, I feel like that and abstinence-only education have turned out to be like the largest public health fails. But if you were going to reinvent an intro to cannabis for young people, for people wanting to try out, like what would you want included in that? I didn't prep you for this question, but I'm curious to know.
That's a good one. I love that question.
And I love that question because I think it's so relevant, as cannabis is becoming more and more legalized and even medical in some states too, aside from recreational. I think those are things we should really be prepared for and understand a lot. And I think in just really preparing, a lot of the younger generation for understanding those things is, yes, there are some risks associated with it. And I think understanding those risks is really important, but also learning how we can do things safely with it too, and having a healthy relationship with it. I think of things like exercise. We can have an unhealthy relationship with exercise just as we can have an unhealthy relationship with cannabis. We're in relationships with really everything that we have in our daily lives. And I think cannabis is one we can still have a healthy relationship with without us negatively impacting us in our normal daily lives. So I think kind of coming to a conversation like that, and here's what safe usage looks like. Here's the different forms of it. Here's the different cannabinoids. Here's the different terpenes, which are just the different chemical breakdowns and compounds that are found in cannabis, but really allowing those folks to be able to understand all the different parts and pieces that make cannabis a whole and knowing how they can use this for themselves and to take that information as they need.
I love that idea of like talking about the relationship that you have with these things, as opposed to, just as Emmalee, you were mentioning, abstinence only education in so many different ways. I remember I had a doctor, my pediatrician, actually, when I was 13 years old, said to me, it was the only adult that ever said this to me, said, listen, you're going to try things and that's okay. You just have to be safe about it. It was the most like liberating thing that I had heard from an adult at that time. And it felt so much safer to be able to try things and feel like I could talk to her about it. It opened up the conversation so much more than someone who's telling me, just don't do drugs, don't try anything. She was like, you're going to try things, it's going to happen. But just be safe about it. And so I love that message of talking about the relationship that you have to these things. And so, for those listeners who maybe don't know what cannabis can be helpful with, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of qualifying conditions, and this is just speaking for the state of Pennsylvania. I don't know what other, cannabis programs have and qualify those conditions for in other states, but I know for Pennsylvania, there's, I believe, 23 qualifying conditions for it. So that's a pretty good number of conditions. So just from reading the research in my one class from it, like the three things that we can almost say are like, yes, like this has really been proven by science. Pain, that is a really big number one. The nausea associated with chemotherapy and multiple sclerosis. Those have been the three big things we've really come to understand this can be super, super beneficial for. And we're really starting to scratch the surface on a lot of other things, particularly when it comes to mental health, like PTSD, anxiety, depression. We're really starting to learn a little bit more about those things. Even some stuff when it comes to like regulating our own blood sugars, maintaining homeostasis, and a lot of things like that, we're starting to learn a little bit more about too. Even cannabis and how that can impact sleep. We're starting to learn a little bit more about the different properties in cannabis and being able to extract certain properties from it that are going to be a little bit better for sleep too. So those are some cool things that we're really starting to learn more about. And I'm really excited for a lot of new studies and research to come out with that in the future.
Okay, can I jump into a question? Because one of the questions
it.
I think lines up really perfectly with this, some of the listener questions. So somebody wrote in, help or hurt? I use cannabis and I find sometimes it helps and other times not.
That is a really, really big question. And so I think like first to start off with that, so our cannabis receptors, cannabis is pretty much like when attached to the body through something called our CB1 and our CB2 receptors. Basically cannabis receptor 1, cannabis receptor 2. And so they are the most abundant. There's something called a G protein receptor that we have, and they are actually the most abundant G protein receptors in the entire body. We have literally so many of our cannabis receptors within our system that every time you're going to use cannabis, doesn't matter what form it's going to be or where you're going to be at using it, it's going to bind to different receptors every single time you use it, even if it is the exact same product, because we simply have so many of those receptors. So even someone, no matter where they're going to be, can have a totally different reaction to the exact same thing just because of the way it's going to be binding to the body. And aside from that too, kind of breaking down into the different cannabinoids. So there's THC, that's the main psychoactive compound that we find in cannabis. And then another one of the primary ones is CBD, which is one of the non-psychoactive compounds we have in it. So those are some really important cannabinoids to consider when really, using cannabis and using it and understanding what's going to be effective, what's not going to be effective, because those different concentrations in there are going to affect you so differently. And really just how your body's going to respond to that. And even the situations when you're in too, and just that, moment that you're in, sometimes it might not be a good time to use it. And those are things to also understand about yourself and just assessing the situation that you're in too.
Wow.
Okay.
I love that. We're gonna start firing questions at you.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you ready? Because that was so good. Okay. This is okay. So I want to ask, so I think a therapist wrote in, how do you assess a client's cannabis use related to mental health? Do you have any tips for safe use?
Yeah, so I think one just in that is just having an open conversation with your clients and letting them know that there's not going to be any judgment here. Like, I'm not here to say, oh my God, like you shouldn't be using this. This is terrible. Or I'm also not going to say, like, oh my God, like you go, this is amazing, and completely leave it. Like, I think those are things that we should really be able to understand. Because I think, like I was talking about before, when it comes to the relationships that we have with things, it's really important to understand our relationship that we have with cannabis. And just thinking about your overall safe use, is this something that you're getting, from the streets, your dealer, or is this something that you're getting from an actual medical dispensary? And I think when you get that thing from an actual medical dispensary that's been lab tested, you can really ensure the safety and efficacy of that product, that it's one going to be a little bit better than anything you might be getting out there when there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of potential danger with that. But also too, even when you're getting some things from the dispensary too, make sure, talk to the pharmacist, talk to someone else that's in there that might be really, really knowledgeable and able to help on what forms of cannabis, what cannabinoids and what terpenes are going to be really beneficial, and how to set up an individualized regimen for yourself that's going to allow you to maintain and keep that safe and healthy relationship with it. And I think, even when you're talking about your therapist with this, like, what's it look like when you're using it a day? How are you using it? Is it impacting your daily life? Is it impacting your relationship with other folks? And if so, those might be some things to explore in the therapeutic space too. But, just really thinking about that, I think it's a really big full picture, and being able to explore that full story of it.
I love that. Go ahead.
Well, I would say it makes me think about, Jen, when we were in grad school and when you're doing your sex therapy training, you have to do a SAR, like the sexual attitude reassessment, and you have to watch all these different type of sexual interactions, right? Like for you to be able to say, all right, what are my triggers, and like, what's my relationship with sex, and what's my relationship with different sexual interests and domains. And it brings up, right, you think about like, if your clinician is having a large reaction to any type of ethical drug use, what's going on for them? And I think for us as providers to also be aware of like, what's our relationship with a substance? How do we feel? What's our triggers? Or if I grew up in a family where there's a lot of addiction and I really believe in abstinence only, then I may not work really well with people that are ethically using cannabis. And like, I think that's important to like disclose as a clinician of like where your shit lies. And if you can't handle your clients using ethical drug use, then you have to refer out.
Right. And if you're a clinician who wants to get into this space more, as you're recognizing the things that are coming up for you, similar to our SAR, right? So our SAR was, we had to kind of look at what are the things coming up for us to assess them so that we are not projecting the stuff that's coming up for us in our sessions with our clients. And so I think that there's space to be able to grow as a clinician too, as you're recognizing what are the things that are coming up for me? Where did this come from in my history? Is this something I want to start to challenge? I want to start to learn about. I want to start to stretch my boundaries. And I think that because, as clinicians, as human beings, we're constantly doing work to be able to grow and assess what our triggers are and what we're bringing into the room so that we can really help our clients as effectively as possible. So I think that that's in general good work to do, to be able to question what certain things bring up for you as we're getting more into this space.
Absolutely. I think that is super, super important to think, just about how the personal can really affect the professional in those sorts of situations, and really being able to know yourself in that space too, and what's going to be either conducive for your client or not super helpful.
Was there any work, Colton, that you had to do on that in getting into this space? Like what was that process like for you?
Oh, she's really coming at you personally.
I'm sorry so much.
I think when I think about that is just really being able to abstract myself from those forms of situations, and just really being able to meet the client where they're in every sort of aspect of their life, and really being able to learn, how can I walk alongside you? How can I really be here to understand your own inner world, and taking all those parts and pieces of me that might be here and putting them way out here, and really being able to join my client in a way that's going to just be really meaningful for them. And I think that's one of the things that I really took for myself, even from just working at the dispensary. If there was someone that was coming in and there might be some things, that said that I may not either agree with, there's some things that might have been really hard for me to hear, is to separate myself from that and realize that I'm here for them in that moment. And I need to take out those parts and pieces of me that might be coming in and just be here for them.
Wow.
Jen, you could ask the next question.
Okay. This, I think, is a really interesting one. We might all be able to weigh in on this one. What if my spouse and I differ on our opinions about cannabis?
Colton, you're up first. Oh,
Oh,
3 therapists, 1 question. This is something I've wanted to do for so
She's
long,
so
Jen.
bad. And she's trying to bring that back that
2 girls, 1 cup. No,
yeah,
this is 3
and I
therapists,
can't.
1 question.
That haunts me.
Okay, Colton, you're up.
Oh my gosh, so I think really with anything where there might be any sort of disagreement for a couple is to really be able to examine where those differences are coming from and really learn about your spouse or your partner's inner world and what that's going to be and what that means for them. So I really identify as a narrative therapist. So for example, if you might have a partner where cannabis might be something that they don't really enjoy, that might be something that's really not congruent for them. And they're like, this might be a hard no for me, to really learn about what that upbringing meant, what those stories were, what those narratives were about cannabis, and just how that has really impacted them in their own view of it. And I think too, in any sort of disagreements that, couples, partners, whatever it might be, can have, is to really start that conversation with some own vulnerability and let them into your inner world and being like, hey, like, this is really hard for me to talk about too. And I recognize this is something that might be really bringing up a lot of emotions and a lot of difficulties for you too. So can we share in that space together about some of our thoughts and really having an open and candid conversation and really seeing where that can go from there? So I think you really want to learn a lot about each other and a lot about where those ideas and conceptions might be coming from for that shared vulnerability.
I love that answer. And I think that that's so important. I think that sometimes what comes up in relationships is that one partner, it isn't just the differences in like how you feel about cannabis use, but projecting your idea about what's right and wrong onto your partner and saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing this with your own body because this is these are my values. So being able to share just like you're saying, Colton, being able to share your values and saying, this is where this is coming from for me. In the end, you get to choose what you do with your body. And it isn't for you to decide what your partner is doing or how they're choosing to manage what's going on with them using cannabis. And so I think that ability to have that discussion around values, where this is coming from for them. And if you find that your partner is pushing their values onto you, that it really can open up that dialogue, just as you're saying, in a vulnerable way of where's that coming from for you? Usually it's fear-based, right? Usually there's a lot of fear that is causing your partner to kind of project those values of, whether there's addiction in their family, whether they're projecting their own fear about how that could affect their relationship. So being able to get down to the vulnerability aspect, I think is really important to be able to have some of those conversations, because that's where, being able for you to choose what you do with your body is really important in your relationship.
So true. I really love that, Jen. That is just such a wonderful, beautiful answer. Oh, that's so great to hear.
You guys answered really well and professionally. My thought.
I'm ready. I'm
Go
ready for
my
yours.
thought is just Albert saying, I'm in a relationship where my partner is like not a cannabis user, and I'm a cannabis user. Unless you're the licensing board listening to this, then I'm not. And depends on who's hearing.
There is no way anyone from the licensing board listens to our podcast.
No, they would hate the
No,
show.
they would hate it.
So I guess the thought is, right, like, are you going to judge and condone me? Right? It is totally fine to have something different from your partner, but can you guys be that and not judge and condone one another? I think that is what really, really matters, right? Like, when it really gets down to it, like, is there a space for this? Colton, one of the things that I think is my absolute favorite thing about you as a clinician is that you are one of the clinicians that I believe has like pure, like, I believe you're really rocking some Virginia Satir, like unconditional positive regard. That is one of the things I've learned for you, that I have known since I've known you as an intern and now as a clinician, is you meet people exactly where they're at with so much love and compassion. And if you have not experienced that from a therapist, then Colton's the therapist for you. But also, like, as a partner, if we have a partner who we think is critical or judgmental, there isn't enough safety in that. And I think when something is already stigmatized, like cannabis, it doesn't leave room for that compassionate curiosity. So can there be space for neutrality and compassionate curiosity for there to be growth and expansion?
Yes.
Mm.
Oh, Love that. I think there's space in that too, with that curiosity to be able to educate your partner on, I understand this isn't for you. Here's how it's really helpful for me. Here's how it really works for me. Because there's some things that work for some people and don't work for other people. So with that compassionate curiosity too, being able to educate your partner on what really works for you can be really helpful if they have the space for it.
And it brings up another good question I have, Nicole, and I want you to answer, which I think this goes into it, is somebody said, how to get over seeing it as an unhealthy way to cope, which means that this person already feels very stigmatized, even if it is a healthy way for them to cope. So, Colton, how would you answer that? How to get over seeing it as an unhealthy way to cope?
Yeah, so I think first, and really seeing that is like an unhealthy way to cope. Like if someone might view it as that, to really examine where those thoughts are coming from and what those narratives have really been told to you and what cannabis has meant through some of those stories you might have heard from family. It might have been from school, it might have been from society, it might have been from politics, and so many other areas and aspects of your life, to really be having you question it in that sort of way that's kind of, placing, it sounds like maybe some blame or some shame on yourself, and thinking it through that, and being able to really examine a lot of those arguments that were said in the past, and then maybe doing some reading, maybe doing some research, and also for your own self too, to remind yourself that those narratives and those opinions that you heard from others may not necessarily be fact within that too, and to really come up with that own readings, that research that's going to be meaningful for you, to maybe help to start to break some of that stigma. And I think too, when it comes to like healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy coping mechanisms, that's a really large and kind of broad spectrum to think of for that too. There are so many coping mechanisms that, oh my God, it would take literally 10 hours to name every single one. And so with that in mind, I think it's really important to understand too, in the grand scheme of things, if you have that healthy relationship with cannabis, that it may not be one of the worst of the worst coping mechanisms in the world there, but can actually be a really healthy one if you're using in a way that's going to be really beneficial for your own self.
Absolutely. Okay, I love this question. Wondering if you could speak to this, or like add in any of your own anecdotes about any other, because there's a lot of I know this might trickle into your calling bullshit, but does cannabis affect your ability to learn or retain information in the long run? Because there's a lot of talk around that, and a lot of other ways that cannabis, affects people long term. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Totally. And there's a lot of research that's really been coming out with that, and some more that I really can't wait to read that's hopefully going to be coming out soon. So when it comes to cannabis and memory, there has been a lot of stuff done on this. And I think one that they've really shown is like, yes, this can impact your memory, at least long-term memory, but there's a lot of caveats and nuances to that. So what they've really found with that is that it can impact your working memory by about -2. However, those that have been like regular cannabis users have actually been shown to overcome that deficit to where it doesn't necessarily impact them. And then with long-term memory,
My memory is I'm a fucking elephant. Jen,
we had this conversation maybe a week ago.
Jen was like, "You remember everything," and I was like, "Yeah." So
her memory is incredible,
wow,
and she said,
"Yeah, and literally."
Okay,
Yeah,
keep going. You're blowing my mind.
Research has really shown too, like a lot of those users where those deficits like might have been found, as soon as they stop cannabis, anywhere from a week to up to a month, once that's really out of the system, a lot of those deficits seem to disappear and everything goes pretty much back to normal. So that's what a lot of the current research has really been saying. Who's to say we can't find out a little bit more about that too? And I think those are some things to be really curious and really open about, to reading a little bit more. So it's not 100% definite answer, but currently that's what I've really been reading and really learned through my class and everything.
I'm wondering, and you might not know the answer to this, but like, are they, I think it seems like now as we're getting closer to legalization, decriminalization, all these things, it seems like there's a lot more research. What is the research we really have? Do we have enough research on cannabis? Is there a lot? Yeah, I'm wondering.
That's a really big question. And
okay.
so
that was an impossible question.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So when it comes to the research, honestly, this here is one of, I think, the most difficult things with it, is that some of the research that's really been out there and being conducted is that a lot of like the cannabis that's being used, like the federal government in these studies. I remember when I took my class in 2019, that only about 20 researchers in the world had access to studying medical cannabis. Keep
20
that
in the entire
20.
world.
So that number has I believe went up just a tiny little bit since then in 2022 right now. But remember in 2019, not many people had access to it. And that's also too. So when we were really looking at those studies, that kind of like when they do like any sort of studies like with controlled substances, that's going to be coming from the government. And the government had then considered like high THC cannabis to be around 9 to 11% in dispensaries in Pennsylvania. If you see a 9 to 11%, that's very low THC. And we're seeing numbers in the 20s and even into the 30s. One time I saw stuff into the 40s for just flower. So those are some things that I think there's going to be a lot more research that's really needed, especially when it comes to examining cannabis, especially in the medical field right now, and how those percentages, those cannabinoids, those terpenes are really being presented in such higher concentrations that have really been studied from, those government types of cannabis that aren't, necessarily matching the potency that's out and available to the public. Mm-hmm. So I think we really need to understand a little bit more just exactly what are these, cannabinoids, what are these terpenes in here, and these percentages really doing and affecting people clinically. And a lot of the studies too, they've been rodent models, they've been stuff with animals. A lot of the stuff hasn't necessarily been studied in clinical human trials. Those are things that can be coming, but right now I think there's a lot more research that really needs to be done with it.
Okay.
You know so much about this.
Yes. Okay. So let's ask this question. A lot of people are very curious about this. People want to talk about the addictive part, right? So somebody had asked in how to know if someone's addicted or not. Somebody else asked in people can develop a dependence to weed even though it's not addictive, right? Like everyone's sort of like, wait, what's right? What's wrong? It's funny. Like all the questions were like, wait, right? I'm not sure.
Am I okay? Yeah. Yes, everyone's pretty much saying, am I okay?
Yeah. So So tell us everything with that.
Yeah, so I think really and this was kind of even going back to the relationships that we have in thinking about that. I think if cannabis is really impacting the relationships that you have with other people and it's negatively impacting, your work life, your home life, there might be something else that can be really going on there. And I think that's something really critical to examine. If cannabis is impacting, your functioning, your relationships, that there might be some things going on that you might really want to be able to talk to someone about and really get the help that you're going to need through there. And for some folks, they can use this daily and it's not going to impact them negatively. And they can really be getting some wonderful medicinal benefits from it, particularly if they're going to be using the right formulations of it, the right kind of product for it. And so I think it's a really fine line. And I think that's something that also needs to really be studied a little bit more to learn just how this can impact that addiction pathway and what that might really mean for some folks.
How do you have any suggestions on how, if someone's listening to this and they're like, I don't know, if I'm addicted to this, how can they ask themselves or monitor that in real time, would you say?
I would ask yourself if, say, maybe you're out in public or something and you're without it. Are you craving it? Is this something that you really need to function? Are you getting irritable? Are you experiencing some negative symptoms or some side effects in the absence of cannabis? And if those might be some yes to those questions, then those might be some things that can be, some negative side effects, or that might be, a potential, I'll say a dependency within that there.
Colton, this is so incredibly helpful.
We got to nothing with sexuality. So I think
it was just we were just really diving into this.
Okay, so we'll do a follow-up with you in sexuality. We're just gonna stay with cannabis for today. We're changing the whole episode. We had no choice. Okay. Smoking when on Zoloft, somebody asked. And I like to always remember to show off my Zoloft tattoo when we talk about Zoloft. So smoking while on Zoloft, Colton, what's the deal? What should I know?
Yeah, so I think, with any mental health medication, Zoloft being an SSRI, that there can definitely be some medical interactions with that, especially when it comes to THC being able to interact with that. However, I think there's a lot more research that really needs to be done on this topic to give a super, super conclusive answer on just what those drug interactions might look like. But it seems as of right now that plain and simple, yes, there's an interaction. Don't know exactly how much that might impact your Zoloft, but it does seem that there can be some side effects from that. And I think really talking to either a pharmacist or someone that has that really great medication background might be someone to ask a little bit more about that to give a super, super conclusive answer, as well as some more research within that just area.
Amazing. I think one of the coolest things when you go to dispensaries is that there is a freaking doctor there. There's somebody, every time I have ever gone to a dispensary, there's a person in a room you can go ask questions to.
And I don't know if everyone knows that. Like,
I don't know if they do.
so I think that's it, because if you have been considering going to a dispensary, I think that might be important actually, Colton. Can you talk to like, what's that process like if someone's considering going to a dispensary?
Or getting their medical
Or
card.
getting their medical, let's start
one
with
step.
medical card. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to that process and what that looks like?
And it
can
probably
someone
depends
go
on
about
states.
that? Right.
Yep.
We're talking
But for
about
Pennsylvania, just talk to Pennsylvania.
Yep. I was about to say first and foremost, this is going to depend on every single state there is, but nonetheless for PA, what that process is going to look like. So you're going to have to talk to a doctor that's actually qualified to be able to sign you up for a medical card, and not all doctors are going to be able to do that. So that could maybe look like your PCP could potentially be qualified for that. You might have to look at some clinics that are able to do that. There's a lot of telehealth clinics that have really come up, especially since COVID right now, that are doing a lot of online appointments to be able to talk to them to see if your qualifying conditions might allow you to receive a medical cannabis card. And then from that, not only are you going to have to talk to a doctor, but you're also going to have to pay a $50 fee to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. That's essentially for them to get you registered into the system, for them to make and mail your card, and for them to say, okay, cool, the doctor said you're qualified for this, let's send you your card. And so that's essentially going to be your ticket into getting into a medical cannabis dispensary, is once you have that physical copy of that card, as well as a state issued driver's license or Pennsylvania ID.
Wonderful. And then once you go to the dispensary, what does that look like?
Yeah, what happens next?
What happens then?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to look a little different from dispensary to dispensary. I know for mine in particular, you're going to come to someone at the door. There's going to be someone checking your IDs. Almost any sort of dispensary is going to have some form of security out there to basically check to make sure that you have a valid medical cannabis card, as well as a Pennsylvania form of identification to allow you into the building. Normally, you're going to have to get checked into there, which is going to be basically them scanning your little card into the system, creating a profile for you, and getting all your stuff set up in the system. Everything through there is also HIPAA compliant too. So that's always a wonderful thing to remind patients of, like, yeah, we're not going to tell other people like, hey, Sally was in here today, or, you know, something like that. Everything in there is really strictly confidential, and we really value that in the dispensary. And when you go in there, after that profile is made and everything, if you don't have, like, most places have online orders, you can place an online order, it's going to be ready for you. But if that's something that you don't want to do and you want to learn more about it, there is going to be a patient counselor in there that's going to be ready to help you. There can be a pharmacist on staff that's also going to be there to answer any questions that you might have as well. I know specifically for the dispensaries that I work at, there isn't a pharmacist physically in the building, but we have an iPad with a headset for you to be able to have a telehealth call with those pharmacists that are on our staff.
Cool.
Wonderful. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Colton, so in every episode, we we have our guests call some bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
So can you call some bullshit in something in your field? Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh my God, absolutely. I think the biggest bullshit that I always hear is that cannabis is a gateway drug, and just being able to be like, no, that is the biggest bullshit. It is just something that is so outdated and just such like a fear factor, like coming up through everything. And I think really breaking that stigmatization at just the forefront is just so important. Because one, it's simply not true. And two, it just really perpetuates that stigma that cannabis is something that's bad, when we don't necessarily think that anymore. And so I'm really being able to break that stigma. I think what we've really found is that cannabis isn't a gateway drug, it's a gateway out drug. For example, one of the qualifying conditions in Pennsylvania is opioid addiction. It is a really, really wonderful therapeutic for folks that, you know, can be coming off opioid addiction to get some of that pain relief, some of any sort of the negative symptoms associated with that withdrawal, to help keep those at bay. And it works on a little bit separate systems within the brain too. So you're not going to be impacting the mu opioid receptors that are in there with any opioid addiction. It's going to be working on your CB1 and CB2 receptors. Completely different pathway, and really helping a lot of those folks get in and out of that opioid addiction. So not necessarily a gateway drug. And there's a lot of science to be able to say, like, no, not necessarily.
Amazing.
Wow.
Before we end today's episode, I want to do a reminder that the ShrinkChicks are not politically neutral. We believe it is our job to be activists and to talk the truth. We have to know that there is a disproportionate number of Black and brown people still imprisoned at this time for cannabis-related crimes. And remember that. So when you are enjoying cannabis ethically and wonderfully, don't forget to also maybe donate some money to get these people released and to help them in drug-related crimes. Yeah. Colton, where can people find you see you, work with you, how can they contact you?
So if you go on therapygroup.com's website, under the little Meet Our Therapist site, there will be me. You can see my little bio. My Google Voice number is going to be on there. And I am currently seeing all Pennsylvania residents virtually right now. And I am more than happy to see you in my virtual space and welcome you here and start that journey together.
Wonderful. And how to contact Colton will be in today's show notes, along with all of our wonderful sponsors. We are sad to say cannabis, but we can't wait to see you next week.
Oh my God, that was good.
That was a good one.
An icon.
We can't
Wow.
wait to see you and talk to you next week. You can watch our full episodes back on YouTube. You spoke, we listened. The full episode is back on YouTube again. Don't forget to follow us at ShrinkChicks. Work with one of our amazing clinicians from the therapy group virtually in California, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Delaware, virtual in Pennsylvania, and also in person in our Westchester and Philadelphia locations. Did I get everything?
You did it.
Woo! Here it
Yes.
is. We will see you next week. And don't ever forget that to grow yourself, you got to know yourself. We love you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.